Okay, so with that, it's VC++ 2020, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Vanessa Liu. Vanessa, tell us about yourself.
So thank you so much for having me, David. I am Vanessa Liu. I lead the Foundries for SAP IO in North America. So SAP IO is the early stage venture arm for SAP, where we invest and also accelerate early stage startups in enterprise tech. We have two parts of what we do. We have a fund where we make investments, and then we have accelerators, which we call Foundries in 9 locations globally. So that's what I have been doing ever since January 2018. And since then, we've been working with over 225 startups. We've made about 30 investments and accelerated north of 175 companies through the work that we do. Everything that we do also has a focus on underrepresented founders. So at least 40% of the founders that we work with on a rolling basis are companies led by underrepresented founders. Our New York Foundry programs are 100% focused on working with women and people of color.
Fantastic. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what the journey is like for a startup going through a foundry? How do they apply? What's the time they spend in the cohort, and so on?
Absolutely. So the Foundry, we run 2 programs a year in each location. So it's similar to other accelerator programs in that it is an application-based process. What we do is we pick themes around specific topics for that program to focus on. So for example, in the spring, we ran a retail tech cohort in New York. In San Francisco, we ran one around travel tech. We're running programs right now around future of work in San Francisco and around automotive manufacturing and retail for New York. So these themes are done in conjunction with a particular line of business, and where we get customers to actually say, hey, we're looking for these types of innovations. We're looking to SAP to help us find those innovations because we're looking for ROI on the investments that we've made with SAP. So we use that as a brief, and we have an open call for applications. Being that it's a no equity, no investment program, what we do is we look for companies that are anywhere between seed and Series C even, depending upon the program. Mm-hmm. And the whole crux of it is finding companies that are looking to integrate with SAP. So over the 3 to 4 month period of time, the focus is really on 3 things. One is figuring out how their solutions can integrate into our platforms so that we can offer this out to our customers. 2, giving them a lot of mentorship around sales and marketing. And then 3, it's also around giving them access to customers. And so we're making customer introductions. But the big crux of it is we look at this as a time of figuring out how we can kickstart the relationship with SAP. So that's what the program is really focused on. And so when startups apply, they go through a process where we screen to see if there's a good fit. So it consists of several rounds of meetings with my team, and then the shortlisted companies. So like the final 15 that we whittle it down to get presented to a selection committee consisting of SAP executives, customers, and also VCs.
And how did SAP come to the underrepresented group focus that you've been able to drive with the Foundries? And I will give you a shout out. I've been to at least a couple of cohorts, and your ability to bring in amazing companies and the participation rate of these underrepresented groups is just extraordinary.
Thank you so much. Well, when it comes to the focus on underrepresented founders, we have really been looking at the fact that this is about finding those companies that can unsurface innovations. If you think about SAP's mission, which is about making technology better, you have to ask, who's it better for? The fact that we work with over 440,000 customers globally, we have to be thinking about everybody. And the fact that VC has been so disproportionately focused on a particular type of company, a particular type of entrepreneur, means automatically that lots of innovations are being overlooked. So for us, we're constantly thinking about, well, what is going to make that difference? We don't look at this as a charity. We look at this as better business. We know that there are innovations out there. They're being led by people who just don't have access to the right networks, but they have these incredible solutions. And so by bringing them into the SAP network, we can really just help them leapfrog as well as help us leapfrog as well.
One of the things another speaker has talked about is that when you look at underrepresented groups, and underrepresented founders, you can really think of them as under-networked founders.
Right.
And what does SAP do to help grow the networks of the participants and connect them inside SAP and outside SAP to customers?
So through the Foundry programs, each company will probably meet about 70 to 80 people within SAP during the course of the time with us during the program. So these are 70 to 80 people who are just really out there to pound the pavement on their behalf, really understand what their solutions are, and also give them the types of business relationships that would really make a difference. So like we're always thinking, of course, like about the bottom line, about the revenue growth opportunities, and what does that entail? And a lot of that really comes from those relationships that, for instance, our account executives have. Those are deep networks, and those are also incredibly valuable networks that we bring to the table at SAP. So that's one area. Another area that we also work on is we have a network of external mentors that we bring in from outside of SAP. So people in the VC world, people who are executives at later stage startups or at other companies who've also raised their hands because they want to give back. They want to correct this network deficiency, as others have put it, because it's just more about being able to provide those connections. And so that's something that we also focus on as well. So for instance, we've had, for some of our computer vision focused companies, we've had people from Magic Leap, for instance, be part of that external network. We work with VCs such as Bold Start or Female Founders Fund or FirstMark or Union Square Ventures, right, to provide that mentorship, also on the fundraising side as well.
Can you talk a little bit about how you measure success, both in business impact and in inclusion outcomes for the program?
So from a business impact perspective, we know that this is a long-term relationship. We know that during the course of the program, it's the metrics, we look at it in three ways. One is what type of value are these startups providing to our customers? The way we measure that is to see if customers are asking for pilots with the companies. And very often we see companies actually inking pilots during the time they're in the programs, which is incredibly fast results. If you think about the typical enterprise sales cycle is 12 to 18 months.
Oh my God, yeah. 3 months is
right.
light speed.
Exactly. So that's like one KPI that we look at. So like the value to the customer. The other one is obviously the value to the startups. What is the NPS score that we get from the startups who work with us? So we are soliciting feedback all the time, and especially at the end of the program. How useful has this been for you? And it's so interesting because so many startups, they come in and they say, well, we were just expecting to integrate with SAP. We didn't realize our whole entire sales pitch was going to change, for instance, because by the time the program finishes, they would have pitched their story, their company at least 20 times to our sales teams, to customers, and they get feedback every single time. So that is like an incredible result. And also finally, what is the ROI for SAP? So just in terms of how are we extending our platforms and the feedback that we get around that? That's something that we take a look at. So that's like the business outcomes that we look at just during the program itself. And then we keep an eye on the types, on basically across like these three metrics, just beyond, because typically companies, after they integrate, they get onto our third-party app marketplace. And then in doing so, we can actually track what that pipeline looks like. It's a joint pipeline that they develop together with us. And then on the inclusion front, of course, like looking at all of our companies, we are monitoring that. We are looking at how these companies are doing when it comes to their next fundraise. Has it set them up on that growth path so that they can close their next round? That's number one. But also, just most importantly, what deals are they getting? It's really down to that at the end of the day, like how many doors were we able to open for them
Hmm.
by working together.
And how have you managed recruiting these companies with underrepresented founders? One of the things I see as a theme in the startup ecosystem is that people that really struggle will talk about a pipeline problem, and people that don't say there's no pipeline problem, you just need to do outreach. So what can organizations that want to find these companies do better to provide market awareness and get them in the door?
So for us, what we think, I think I completely agree. It's not a pipeline problem. It's about looking harder. It's also looking in the right
In new places, yeah.
in new places. And so that's like what we like over invest in. Like, so we have incredible VCs, for instance, that are also now trying to change the ratio. And so we've been working quite a lot with them who, like, for instance, Precursor Ventures, we've
Yep.
had a couple of companies in their portfolio come into our foundry. We've also we've now developed that name so that VCs then say, hey, we have this founder. We see that you're about to launch this program. We would love to support. These are companies that we think would really benefit from working together with this SAP.
Right.
I think like the whole notion of working with a corporate VC has changed over time. I think in the beginning, institutional VCs were reluctant to work with corporate VCs. And then now if you show the value to the portfolio companies and like, look, on the foundry side, we don't get on cap tables. So it's really just
Right. So
like a boost.
Easy, non-dilutive step.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think also in the last decade, corporate venture investment has surpassed traditional venture investment. So the balance of dollars is changing, and that money talks. So
exactly, money does talk. Money talks, but and also the relationships. And I think
yeah,
I think people see now also when it comes to inclusive entrepreneurship, it's not just something that one type of company can help. Like everybody has to like really make it a focus, and that changes
yeah.
outcomes.
So let's build on that a little bit. As companies, as global companies try to penetrate new markets and go wider, what can they learn from the successes that SAP Foundries have had? What can they think about if they're trying to reach new markets and set up accelerators? How can they learn from your experience?
So I like to think that we are very customer led, and I think there's so many pain points out there to solve for,
Yeah,
especially on the B2B side, right? We don't want to be the only B2B accelerator out there. We want our peers to be doing the same. And because this is about really just like all boats will rise type of an approach.
absolutely.
And I think it's about identifying those clusters, those industry clusters that would make most sense, and then just being very thoughtful about saying, well, this is how we want to work with startups. This is the value that we can provide at SAP because we have such a strong sales and marketing
Hmm.
angle. We know that that is the value that we could provide to startups, and where it's helpful for them, it's also helpful for us. Most importantly, it's helpful for our customers. And so thinking about that type of an approach, I think there are also examples of other accelerators that are like that. If you take a look at, for instance, like in New Jersey, as you know, like there are several groups that are doing great work around that. Newark Venture Partners is one.
Yeah,
Like they have corporate partners that they work with and that they bring in so that there's like a ready-made group of customers for the startups to work with. And so really being thoughtful about how are you going to bring relationships. So it's not just about meeting, it's about sponsoring.
hmm And can you talk a little bit about how Foundries and Foundries success has been received by other parts of the SAP organization? So you've got uh, the pillar of reducing friction and technical integration and getting more interesting apps into your store. You've got shiny new technology. You've got a great inclusion and community building story. What has played the best as you are in the bigger corporate landscape that others can, and maybe that's a little, no insider baseball here, but just what kinds of things can, as people think about trying to organize such a program, what are the persuasive arguments that can advance?
I think if you think about working with large organizations, I think and both you and I come from backgrounds where we've been in smaller environments before and startups, and where you're so nimble, and then you work with a large corporate and you're like, why is this taking so long? It's just like the nature of the organization and the layers that you have to work through and the stakeholders involved. What we see here is that, startups from the outside can try to work with us. It'll probably take them to 12 to 18 months.
Right, right, right. So this is a way to pass that defensive mode.
That's exactly right. So that gets shrunk down to 3 months
Yeah.
because we've lined up the right resources and the right stakeholders, so that that type of process just gets compressed. So that is a huge factor. I think any startup working with enterprises, they know that. They know, like, we need to prioritize the enterprises that we work with and the industry segments, and what does that mean, what does that look like, and how is that going to shift. And so those that get it right, like, are able to maneuver that.
Sure. And if you're investing in a corporate pilot and door number one is a 15-month cycle and door number two is a 3-month cycle, it's a pretty easy choice if you've got burn.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly
Okay.
right.
What kinds of advice do you have for investors broadly looking at underrepresented founders and ways to engage with them?
So what we're finding is that, and I'm so glad to see the shift now, that really the tide is that people realize that this is a big problem. It is just so lopsided, and this is about the networks, right? And I think those that are very just particular and look at the diversity metrics, it forces them to look harder.
Yeah.
It's not just about relying on your networks. And I think that that is the shift that we see and what investors need to do. You just need to have better networks. And how does that come? Number one, institutional funds, so who are the LPs of VCs, are starting to ask for that. I think that when you have that mandate, that's going to force the GPs to look differently. And many of them are realizing, like, a lot of that comes from who do we have in our teams. And so you are seeing that shift just in terms of having people who are underrepresented also become the GPs. It's not happening fast enough, but that is going to make a very big difference. I think those that also are using scouts out there and just like really pounding the table, that's making a difference as well. And so that's basically what, like, the big advice that we see is, like, change the composition of your team so that you can, like, really just reflect the type of entrepreneur that you want to attract. That makes a huge difference. When I was in my prior life, I was running a venture startup studio, and because of, like, the fact that I am a minority, I'm Asian American, I had lots of women entrepreneurs and underrepresented people of color come to me because they said, like, look, I just feel like you're not like the typical just only male.
Sure. And this
Like,
is an inclusion thing, right? I mean, it's hard to have the kinds of candid investor conversations that you want to have with your portfolio companies if they're like, there's nobody here that gets me.
exactly.
How about for founders? When should they reach out to SAP to participate in a Foundry program, and how should they think about that as a resource to help their startup the most?
I would say, like, the sweet spot is for companies who already have several enterprise customers under their belt,
Mm-hmm.
and there's overlap with SAP's customers. Typically what happens is that SAP customers will ask them like, hey, can you integrate into SAP?
Right.
Those are the companies that are the right fit. It doesn't matter how many customers you have. Like we've had companies in our midst who've had 2 enterprise customers, and they're just like, well, this is our focus, and we've just been asked from our customers like they need integration from the get-go. Like that is
Right.
a company that is right to work with us. There are some lines of businesses where we know that that we have certain other requirements, but that is the single biggest part. Like this is about integration. This is not about figuring out your MVP together with SAP.
Right.
This is really about making sure that you invest the time. Like if you don't have the resources nor the priority focus on integration, it's probably not the right time. We should like wait. And
Right.
that's the counsel that we've given to companies before, where they've waited a couple of years and now it's
Get the most out of it. Yeah.
exactly, you get the most out of it.
So any last words to our audience on diversity and inclusion in the startup space and things they can do right now to move the needle on that?
I think when it comes to, this is really about showing the solution that you have and showing how different you are and what you bring to the table, and also the types of perspectives that you bring that could be incredibly meaningful. I'll just use a couple of examples. Last year, in one of the companies that we had in our enterprise social impact cohort, was a company called Gooder. So they are based in Atlanta. What they do, it's a food waste management company. So they take the surplus food that companies and
Right.
stadiums and conferences have, and they siphon that off, because like for the 4 hours after the food is served, it's still good, but typically if it's not eaten, it's tossed.
Right.
And so they have a network of communities that they deliver this food to. So they charge the companies for the removal of the food.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, they are also addressing a critical community need.
Right.
And that is a type of solution that is just so distinctive, because the founder, Jasmine Crowe, saw firsthand how hunger was a critical issue in the communities that she was in. And so that is, a beautiful example of a company that is solving acute needs with a different perspective. We do a lot of future of work types of work because of Success Factors, which
Sure.
is our human capital management arm. And so in there, of course, diversity and inclusion and bringing those types of solutions is something incredibly important to the customers that we work with. And so our San Francisco cohort right now, we have 6 companies, I think 4 of which are completely focused on, in different ways, how do you ensure that your organization is going to be more diverse and more inclusive, and bring those types of technology solutions. And the only way to do that is by having people who've experienced that firsthand.
Right.
And so they know what is necessary in order to affect the change through the technology solutions that they provide.
Vanessa, thank you so much for your time and your leadership in this space.
Thank you so much, David.